Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight we'll be talking about the latest show from Marvel Cinematic Universe, the surprisingly low-key Wonder Man, and then we will be returning to The Power Fantasy, a comic by Kieran, Gillen and Caspar Wijngaard about superheroes as a metaphor for nuclear standoff, which we've enjoyed a lot in the past. But before all of that, Alistair, what else have you been consuming in the last fortnight?
So, I've been watching a film that's of a quite different tone to the two things we'll talk about today, and it's, nice to have, I guess, a range of things to balance out the cultural diet. I watched a German comedy drama called Soul Kitchen. This is from quite a few years ago, 2009, so it's been around for a bit. It's interesting, it's a kind of quite slight comedy drama, I suppose, in that it's definitely in the comedy area, but it's not, I guess, like really dense with humour. Probably the closest comparison in many ways to this is The Bear, partly because it's got that sense of comedy and drama, but the comedy is not as overt as you might think. Also because it takes place in a kitchen or in a restaurant.
I was about to say, based on the title, there might be another point of comparison.
Yeah, it's another story about a very stressed man running a restaurant in Hamburg. He's got a restaurant, he's got problems with unpaid taxes. His brother, who's on parole from prison, needs a job but isn't willing to work. He's got a neighbour who just hates him and yells at him all the time, and he's done his back in as well, thus leading to, So things aren't going very well for our main character. Oh yeah, and his girlfriend is moving to Shanghai.
Well, even by the Bear standards, that's a lot of suffering.
There's a lot of suffering for this poor guy, And then, the comedy comes from how he tries to manage this whole thing, such as by trying to turn the restaurant around, such as hiring a new chef who is, extremely angry and, threatens customers with knives all the time, and also how he attempts to buy off the tax people and things like that. It is genuinely funny, a few outbreaks of silliness plus some bizarre characters, specifically the brother and a sort of weird group of criminals that he hangs around with, sort of like low-level thugs, doing silly things like robbing nightclubs. It's pretty funny overall, I must say. It's got this character-based, realistic comedy. These aren't ridiculous, over-the-top people.
In some ways, it sounds a bit more heightened than, say, The Bear. It might just be the mention of robbing places and threatening people with knives.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some characters, I suppose, are a bit more, larger than life. The chef guy who's always forever shouting at people and, threatening people with knives and nailing notes to boards with knives, things like that. Is a larger-than-life character. There's also very much drama aspect to it, in that you do really feel for the guy and his struggle to hold on to the restaurant, especially as it has that sort of early third act low point when it looks like all is lost. The sort of unpleasant local businessman is going to take over the building the restaurant's in and shut it down. Like I say, it's got the sort of formulation of a classic comedy, so obviously it doesn't end, sadly.
Yeah, I guess we've had other things recently where you've got the big evil company is going to take over the plucky local business. It's a classic.
Yeah, it's very much one of those things, and they're taking over a warehouse and he really cares about the food and the cooking. Again, I suppose similar to The Bear in that way. He's trying to, create this sort of Michelin star fancy food in this sort of old industrial bit. There's a guy who, I think repairs, old boats in, the next unit who just, hates him and just yells at him all the time for being a pretentious... a pretentious middle-class person.
I did see a post on Blue Sky or something somewhere saying, I too love to watch and enjoy The Bear and root for Kami, but in real life, would we root for the pretentious man trying to turn this local beef joint into a restaurant for people with money?
Yeah, probably not, I suppose. Well, not on the outside. I guess we root for Kami because we know him very, very intimately, because, we can see into his life in a way that even his closest friends can't as the viewers. Yeah, and you know that he cares about the restaurant and his relationship with his brother and things like that. But I guess that's the way with a lot of fiction, that a lot of, anti-heroes, from the outside or, from the from a sort of neutral perspective, they look quite bad. But, it's only because we know their internal workings, because they're the main character in the work of fiction, do they become relatable. I mean, Batman also puts on a mask and beats up the mentally ill. So,
So, I suppose I could see how the angry man with the boats might have a point, or at least might have enough of a point to get some jokes out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously there's a nice coming together towards the end when even the angry man with the boat next door doesn't like the snooty businessman who's trying to take over the restaurant.
Ah, yes, he's found someone worse to unite against.
Yeah, it's the classic, they all realise that they prefer each other, including, the various oddballs and nutters. Yeah, and there's some really, sweet bits as well, things like that. Especially, I feel the relationship with the brother is quite nice. Yeah, the sort of brother who's a bit of a tearaway. Well, he's in prison for, again, some sort of, not particularly heinous crimes, trying to get back on the straight and narrow, and they've got a pretty good, realistic relationship, I feel, of these, siblings who love each other, but also there's a lot of tension there in their relationship, and also the relationship with his girlfriend, and, it does, long distance quite well, showing like the strains and pressures that puts on a relationship. Generally, there is like early third act lull when it kind of stops all the humour and becomes like quite a serious film for a bit. I think it does a good job of like balancing the tones, which is obviously something we're quite interested in this podcast. I mean, The Bear also balances the tone very well, sometimes sweet, sometimes sad, sometimes funny.
Yeah, I mean, The Bear, I think, as it goes along, becomes more and more of a sort of uplifting therapy drama about these people working through their issues. But when it's at its best, yeah, it also has a good balance of comedy drama.
Exactly, yeah. You know, there's a lot of similarities here. And again, it's about people working through their relationship troubles and things like that, but sort of the medium of food. Generally, if you're in the mood for more kitchen-based dramas, I do remember seeing a think piece going around a couple of years ago, people saying, like, I've actually had it up to here with kitchen-based dramas. So, yeah, I think that was after there was, like, Boiling Point as well, which is the British take on The Bear.
Yeah, that was the British one that came out a bit after The Bear. Yeah. Yeah,
there was originally a film with Stephen Graham. The film is really, really good. And then they did a spin-off TV show, which I imagine probably wasn't quite up to that standard. But I can see how some people might be over kitchen dramas. But this one is pretty good, yeah, especially if you like your German cinema. And yeah, it's one of those pleasantly down-to-earth sort of films. Just a man trying to go about his put-upon life, struggling with backache and financial problems and work stress. So yeah, it's relatable.
Nice, no, sounds good. I gather they've confirmed that the next season of The Bear will probably be the last one, so maybe after that I'll take in all the other kitchen shows.
Interesting, yeah. Well, I hope they bring it into a good landing, because I was worried they'd just keep making it for, like, way past the point when it was like they should have stopped, like, Peep Show getting to season 8 or something like that.
It feels like they're getting to the point where they're starting to struggle to get the massive cast together, so it's probably a good time to gently wind it down.
Yeah, now that like they're in Marvel films and things like that. Well, the rate they do them, that means it'll be this year probably, whether they finish up The Bear. So, okay, well, stay tuned for more kitchen-based opinions. So I've been watching some more art house movies. Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
I have been reading more comics about a long-standing classic character I haven't previously read much of. Although I've not gone back to the very beginning in this case, I've been reading the series Vampirella, who is a sexy vampire superhero who has been around since the late 60s, well, 1969 to be specific, but about 6 or 7 years ago was taken over by the writer Christopher Priest, who I've enjoyed the work of in the past. I think he wrote a run on Black Panther, which I think we read some of as part of the old recommendation section.
Yes, I believe that was a recommendation that coincided with watching Captain America Civil War.
Yes.
Way back then.
He also did a comic called Quantum and Woody, which is very much one of those things which would probably have come up in the recommendation section had it continued, and may one
day. No, it did. It did.
Oh, we did. Haha.
Yes.
It's such an obvious recommendation, I've just forgotten, but I did it. Yes, he also did Quantum and Woody. He's had a bit of a quiet period in the comics career, but he re-emerged in the late 2010s, did a few bits for DC, and is now doing Vampirella. And has actually been doing Vampirella, for the last 6 or 7 years solidly. He's on like 50 or 60 issues of this now, so I thought, as a fan, I should finally, check this out, even though Vampirella is not a character I have any knowledge of or interest in. So, Vampirella is basically a alien who closely resembles a vampire, but is not in fact a vampire. She's not undead, she just has fangs and drinks blood. She tries to drink the blood of the criminals and the bad people, but does, kill them. And she wears a very, very small costume that resembles a bathing suit. She lurks in alleys, kills criminals, and so on. And this has been presented with various levels of exploitation over the years. Christopher Priest's approach is to put Vampirella in therapy and try and develop a very complex mythology about her origins and how she originally arrived from her home planet, and dive deep into the relationship between her and her mother, which is certainly an approach to a character who is mostly known for lurking sexily in alleyways and killing criminals.
That is not exactly where I expected this to go, but it does sound like an interesting premise. Definitely a bold new take on the character, which I guess is what you need. Yeah, you need to revitalise a character that I suppose has been around for so long and has been in so many different incarnations.
Yeah, I mean, I have to give Priest credit for, Priest and his publisher, I guess, credit for letting him go full out-of-sequence storytelling, confusing plot devices, long talky dialogue sequences on this character, who I don't think was so much involved with that sort of thing before. I have done a little bit of gentle internet searching to try and work out how the hardcore Vampirella fan base feels about the Christopher Priest run, and quite a lot of them seem quite annoyed by it, to be honest. But comics is a bit of a cutthroat commercial industry, and he's been doing this continuously for, as I say, about 6 or 7 years at this point, with a new storyline just announced, so I assume someone's buying it. I don't think it's the best Christopher Priest comic, just because I find his laconic banter and cleverness and the obligatory sexy bits and horror bits to be at times a slightly odd fit, but I am quite enjoying it as an odd reading artifact. I've read like 60 issues of it, so thankfully I'm enjoying it.
Sounds good. It's not a character I'm particularly familiar with. I assume this is one who hasn't been adapted in a medium that I'm familiar with.
No, I am scrolling out of curiosity down the Wikipedia page to see if there is a section on adaptations of Vampirella. Oh, a film was produced in 1996. No discussion of how that went. And
Not well, I guess.
And in 2021, they announced a new film was in development with other plans for TV adaptations as well. I've no idea how much that'll incorporate the priest stuff. You know, he is making an effort to actually put together a mythology and make it all make some level of sense and actually have a bit of a basis in character. So I wouldn't be surprised if they drew on it a little bit. She has a sister called Draculina, who she has this intense rival with. She has a sister called Draculina. She comes from the planet Draculon, and in one story she marries Dracula. They're getting a lot of use out of that one prefix.
Well, it's the vampire that everyone knows really well, I suppose.
The one word, yes. They can't use the word vamp too much. That's her name, so they have to use Drac instead.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess like some of these things are from comics that in the past that approached it maybe a bit more tongue-in-cheek than the Christopher Priest one.
Yeah, I mean, you can't do this stuff with a stone-cold Alan Moore seriousness. There's still a bit of camp silliness. As I say, there's a bit of fun sexiness or bloody horror in most issues. You know, she still kills people and drinks their blood. But, yeah, there's just a little bit more dialogue and characterisation and occasionally very involved storylines involving different magical factions around the fringe. It is, as I say, an odd and sometimes disjointed comic, but it's fun seeing Christopher Priest still going. In a comic market where it seems often a bit of a struggle to get an ongoing series going, it's nice that he's managed to find one.
Yeah, as you say, like, I don't think this would have continued so long if people weren't buying it or it wasn't successful. Yeah, so, yeah, someone out there must be really enjoying it.
I don't know, Vampirella may well be one of these characters who has a certain core audience who will buy it no matter what, but I've been in and around comics long enough to see several other relaunches of Vampirella come and go, and this seems to be the one that has stuck the longest, so I assume he's doing something right.
Yeah, it's interesting. And yeah, using therapy, I guess, as a way for like non-linear storytelling does sound like a good construction. It's definitely something that I think has been used in films and books before, I suppose, because you've got the structure of therapy and then people in therapy tell a lot of stories, which I suppose makes for a good framing device for fiction.
Yeah, plus it lets them have this storyline where she sits in therapy and recounts what's happened to her and occasionally bounces around a bit in the timeline, and it sort of roots it a bit. I think he's used similar devices before. There have been, I think, the first storyline of Constable Woody, which it sounds like we read, was based around a police interview using a similar framework of them describing events that had happened to them in a slightly disjointed way.
Yeah. No, I remember that. So this is not a complete run. So as far as there's not like an ending to the story, it's just continuing in a sort of open-ended way, or do we know if he's got like a master plan or a structure to the story he's telling?
I don't know. I mean, Priest's been around a long time. He is in some ways a bit of a classic comic writer, in that to an extent I think he'll carry on until someone tells him to stop. But hopefully they'll give him some warning and let him put some sort of cap on it.
I suppose it's one of those things is that sort of multiple evolving ongoing storylines. So I guess across 6 years there's been lots of storylines that have come and go rather than one big master plan.
Yeah. I think this is probably one of his longer running series. I think Black Panther lasted 60-something issues and Deathstroke was like 50. So yeah, it's another one of those. It's another pretty substantial run for him, which, as I say, at this stage in both his career and the comic industry is nice to see. Yeah.
That does sound good. Yeah. And he's a very good storyteller. Like, yeah, I enjoyed both Quantum and Woody and the Black Panther comics that we read. It was the one that we read was the one that introduced things like the Doro Milaje.
Yeah, the Doro Milaje, Everett K. Ross, and of course, the Devil's Pants.
Yeah, yet to appear in the films.
Yeah, and for some reason they haven't yet had a prolonged storyline in which Martin Freeman argues with Mephisto, who I guess is now in the MCU. So Sacha Baron Cohen could turn up to give Martin Freeman a pair of magical trousers.
I mean, that sounds like the sort of thing that actually could happen at this point.
Yeah, if they do make Black Panther 3, which I hear they are threatening to do, I'll be immensely pleased if they bring in Sacha Baron Cohen to enact that storyline. That would make me immensely happy as a Priest fan.
Yeah, but I guess he's good at adding to the existing mythology of characters, such as, like, you can't really think of Black Panther now without the Doro Milaje. And so, I don't know, I guess he's adding to the Vampirella sort of lore by, like, building out the character more in the world a bit more.
Well, yeah, I think he's trying to tie together a lot of the continuity as well. Like, this is not a comic I'm an expert on. I don't pretend to know that much about the pre-Priest Vampirella stories, but I gather he is trying to bring all the continuities together into something resembling a single unified timeline where everything can somehow make sense. And considering there's 60 years of it, 65 at this point, good luck to him.
Yeah, that's an ambitious project. But it sounds like you've been consistently enjoying it across the run.
Yeah, it's fun. I'll go away now and maybe come back when there's a few more volumes built up. But it's been a fun few weeks.
Sounds good. Yeah, well, we can also probably get more in your newsletter.
I imagine there'll be a write-up in my newsletter. Yes, everybody subscribe to my newsletter.
Next up, we will be discussing Wonder Man, a new TV series for Marvel, starring Yahya Abdul-Mateen II as Wonder Man, and Ben Kingsley reprising his role of the Mandarin / Trevor Slattery, the actor. Set in the contemporary MCU, the TV show follows Simon, a struggling actor who has nostalgic love for the fictional character Wonder Man within the universe. He then cottons on to the fact that there is making a film of Wonder Man. However, Simon is also hiding the fact that he has superpowers and is very much trying to live under the radar. He meets Trevor Slattery, formerly the Mandarin and a down-on-his-luck British actor, played by Ben Kingsley, and together they form a sort of unlikely buddy act, trying to support each other through the difficult world of Hollywood and also the difficult life of being people with superpower connections in a world that doesn't always view them favourably. We've seen this complete mini-series on Disney+. Nick, what did you make of it?
Yeah, maybe a bit of a cold take at this point, but yeah, I enjoyed this. It's a pleasingly sort of low-stakes comedy drama story, which you almost watch with a sort of air of dread that it's going to at some point collapse into some massive overwrought superhero plot with endless huge explosions, but no, it makes it all the way to the end without really going there. It's quite impressive. It really commits to just being a fairly gentle story for the most part about the character journey and relationship between Simon Williams and Trevor Slattery, which is very well acted by the two main actors. And yeah, there's a bit of light commentary about Hollywood and acting. I'm not sure it's brutal satire, but there is a funny standalone episode in which gets a bit more into one character's rough journey with having superpowers as an actor. And yeah, no, I enjoyed it. It manages to find a little bit of pathos. I think Yahya Abdul-Mateen II especially is really, really good, actually. He gives a really sort of serious but vulnerable, I guess, edge to Simon Williams. He's not, a funny, friendly, chatty, relaxed guy. He's kind of constantly on edge, but the series sort of gets a bit into why that is and makes him kind of likeable. And it's a very good, subtle, charismatic performance. And Ben Kingsley, turns up as Trevor Slattery, having a laugh as ever, but again, manages to find a bit of pathos in it. So yeah, no, I enjoyed this.
Yeah, I like this a lot as well, actually. This could be one of my favourite of the Marvel TV shows they've done, partly because it just is so bold and different from what I expected in that it's really more of a character drama, the sort of mismatched buddy thing about the relationship between these two struggling actors. I mean, there's even like an extended bit in like the first episode when they watch Midnight Cowboy, story about people moving to the big city, trying to make it and ending up living a sort of downtrodden existence. And there's a lot of like archetypes of classic like LA aspiring actor stories and things like that. And it's much more about the friendship dynamic of it. And then it's very much like uses the kind of wider MCU is in the background. And obviously got the storyline of like Simon having superpowers, trying to hide it, wanting just to pursue acting and being like a normal person. And the sort of investigations that are going in, people trying to track him down. But really that's like a sort of minor part of the story when it's mainly focused on this friendship, but also and his desire to kind of get this part. This will be the big thing that makes him, partly because they're remaking a film that he saw with his dad when he was a child, and he's got a difficult relationship with his family. So it's really, I think, like playing on a sort of a very different kind of emotional spectrum to the normal sort of Marvel stuff, and it really works well for that.
Yeah, no, it does a very good job of, as I say, Simon's quite a taciturn character, but partly the writing, partly Yahya Abdul-Mateen II's performance, it really sort of digs slowly into why he's like that and why he wants what he wants, and it gives it a real sort of tragedy, I guess, of him not quite being able to say what he wants and not quite being able to commit to get the things he wants. And it's quite low-key, I guess. There's not a huge amount of plot, and what there is probably somewhat predictable if you actually think about it. Like, once you've established the basic facts of the Trevor-Simon dynamic by the end of the second episode, well, I think possibly the end of the first episode, you could probably take a reasonable punt at what's going to happen broadly in the rest of the season, and you wouldn't be entirely wrong. But, a lot of it is just the charm of the individual performances and the relationship, and the fact that it's just, well done.
Yeah, you're right that Yahya Abdul-Mateen II is really good as like doing this kind of character that's not like a big like open book. He's very closed, he's very secretive. But I think it's a really good like study in showing you like anxiety and fear and how it affects like your relationships and affects all these aspects of your life, and also this sense of thwarted ambition. This character who his life's not going the way that he wants it to, and like it conveys a lot of that stuff without like it being like really like unsubtle and it being there sort of there in the background. I mean, there's a good episode when they go to his mother's birthday and like they see his brother who's more successful, and there's community around him of people for like a lot of like expectations placed on him and a lot of family pressure, and it really shows how he got to be the person he is, and like why he's like actually quite an unhappy guy.
Yeah, the superpowers stuff comes into it, I guess, fairly early, but it's very downplayed. I mean, they don't really have any superhero fights, to be honest. There's not really a spoilers, I guess, there's not really a superpowered villain in this. The only character who really, I think, displays on panel, on screen, I guess, superpowers is probably Simon. And it's mostly just as a source of angst to him, because whenever he gets stressed or upset, he can't contain his superpowers, which again is well played as just a metaphor for this sort of contained rage and unhappiness that he kind of builds up inside himself.
Yeah, exactly. It does use it as a really good metaphor for someone living a secret life and with like emotional problems. Yeah, and he's trying to like express it through art, but he's also like quite blocked because he can't get in touch with the person. He feels he has to hide his true identity, which again, these are all, even though this is using superheroes as a metaphor for things we can all relate to, in the way that, that like X-Men used race, and civil rights and things like that. And it's very, very moving, I feel. There's also like this running thing of how you're not allowed to have superpowers in Hollywood. There's a whole flashback episode that's done in black and white about a whole different group of characters explaining kind of how this came about, that I thought was quite good as an interesting detour episode. Also, the Simon, he really feels he can't be himself, but he's trying to like express all these feelings through acting. And generally one of the most moving bits is when Trevor kind of puts him in touch with his real self so that he can deliver a great performance. It's just a sweet, touching bit of these like people supporting each other and being friends and helping each other, which is very moving.
Yeah, no, obviously Trevor was kind of introduced in Iron Man 3 as kind of a bit of a comic relief punchline, and he turned up in Shang-Chi in basically that same role. But yeah, they get a bit into the sadness of the character here, and this sense of him also being a struggling actor in his own way. Yeah, there's a bit of sort of industry satire stuff. Obviously, I'm not at all qualified to say how brilliantly accurate it is, but it's quite funny within the context of this. It provides some interesting bits which feel like they're giving you some insight into the life of the jobbing actor. Things like the bits where they take an entire episode just desperately trying to film a self-tape for Simon, just trying to find somewhere suitable to record him. It's a nice sort of sense of, I guess, sort of low-stakes buddy comedy drama antics.
Yeah. Well, again, it works really well, the sort of the dynamic between them. I mean, Ben Kingsley is just a brilliant actor. He's been in so many good films and things over the years. And he is very, very good in Iron Man 3, still held up as one of the best of the Marvel films, because he's able to do a threatening villain in that, the Mandarin, and also, but then like switch it around and basically be a slightly silly actor guy. And then the sort of things they allude to, his past as an actor, his gambling and alcoholism, they turn that into an actual character, a man who has had some success in his life acting, but has also completely destroyed, his own career through gambling and drink, and that kind of makes you a three-dimensional character. But it is Ben Kingsley's performance that kind of really makes you feel like this is a three-dimensional human being with warmth and a full person, that sometimes you can be like devastatingly funny, and there are some like really quite funny bits in this, but also like some really quite like moving bits about generally how they relate to each other, like when Trevor supports Simon to become a better actor, or when he sees him with his family and helps him through some emotionally difficult things. And like Ben Kingsley is good enough to basically make the character really funny and also like very human and quite dramatic, and like make it all consistent and make it all like fit together into one thing. It's difficult to portray a character with so many facets, who's also a supporting character who doesn't get as much screen time as the main character, but Ben Kingsley does make him feel like a real complete human being.
Well, yeah, that is a bit of a running thread through this, I guess, is he's kind of fighting his own nature as a bit of a, at times, a bit of a selfish buffoon to try and be a better person to help Simon, with varying levels of success throughout, which does come to a fore at the end. But yeah, Ben Kingsley's doing a very good job of containing all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that he got more time doing his character, because obviously he's brilliant in Iron Man 3 and it's a very funny moment. I mean, Ben Kingsley's such a good actor. I wanted to see more of him in this role, and this is basically like the perfect vehicle for that.
Yeah, I mean, we've said before about a lot of Marvel things that, the characters are often very well cast. Again, we've said before, whoever does the casting for Marvel is definitely earning their salary. But sometimes they end up getting subjected to quite generic, bangy superhero plots, when, to be honest, you were quite happy just watching them hang out. So it's impressive that at this point, however many years we now are into the MCU, they really have just made a show where the two characters just kind of hang out and have a gentle character arc for most of the show. And funnily enough, it's one of the best things they've done in a while.
Yeah, it's interesting. They picked up something like, it's like 12, 13 years since Iron Man 3 came out. But they just picked up this one particularly as Fred, I guess because people remember it. It's one of those things that, like, this is one of the most standalone MCU films or projects, like, it's all they've done. So, you don't have to have seen Iron Man 3 to watch this. You can just watch it as, a story about, aspiring actors. One of them's got a sort of magical secret that they're trying to keep hidden. Really, this is the least of all continuity needed at all. There's very little acknowledgements to anything wider going on. There's a few nice in-jokes, like when he's walking through Hollywood, they're making a film of Steve Rogers the musical, which if you remember from the
Hawkeye
Christmas show as a Broadway musical based on Steve Rogers, and now there's a film of it. But that's just like small things in the background that are just there to make fans go, it's that thing. They're keeping up the continuity. To be honest, this is the least continuity of any of the Marvel things pretty much at all, because it really is not a story about superheroes. It's a story about the average people who kind of get swept up into the big ebb and flow of the Marvel universe.
Yeah, no, I can confirm. My partner watched this, having never seen Iron Man 3, and had a very nice time with it. So yeah, it's accessible for whatever it's worth if you're considering jumping into this but worried about the homework.
Yeah, it's definitely a good place to start off. And I kind of liked how it's also quite episodic. Like, each episode is very distinct with its own sort of storyline. And there are some really, really good ones. We mentioned the flashback one about Doorman. That's quite good. That is quite a sort of tragic story. There's one about his family, the one about the self-tape. The family one, I think, was especially moving and stuff. Possibly the best one is the one when he accidentally gets filmed by a bike courier using his superpowers, who then blackmails him, and he gets drawn into this ridiculous fight between couriers over a homemade sweet company. That is just like one of those like really funny episodes, and it's just like each bit gets like more and more silly as it goes along.
Yeah, no, I do always enjoy the characters getting dragged into some complete banality at a crucial point in their arc. Yeah, that's always funny. There's also the episode where they go to the director's house for this sort of prolonged in-person audition session, which is an excuse to do more sweeping satire of ridiculous auteur directors, but it is very funny.
Yeah, I did think the director character who Simon was auditioning for is particularly funny. I don't recognise his actor, Zachtal Björk. I think it's something Eastern European. I guess he's kind of supposed to be Werner Herzog or someone like that. Maybe like Tchaikovsky. Well, Tchaikovsky's dead, I suppose. But yeah, I think he's in that kind of vein of very like artistic directors. One of the conceits is he wants to cast like a complete unknown as Wonder Man, which obviously just works well with the plot, but also like it's the sort of thing maybe a sort of pretentious art director would do when given a superhero film.
Well, yeah, the joke obviously is, he's talking a lot about the pretentious importance of it, but everything we see of the film suggests it's very much going to be a standard superhero film.
Yeah. But it's interesting also they've got this almost like metatextual element or slightly postmodern element of like Wonder Man is a character within the Wonder Man TV show. Like there's a fictional character called Wonder Man they're making a film about who's very much done in that sort of 60s, a bit Adam West, a bit cheap and cheerful superhero films that they used to make that are now, yes, you call it camp classics. Flash Gordon, that's the other thing I'm sort of thinking of. I don't know much about the character Wonder Man from the MCU, but like what any of these depictions bear in relation to the original Wonder Man, but they've certainly come up with something that I hadn't anticipated.
The comic book Wonder Man, the gimmick was that he was a superhero who was also an actor. I mean, I'm sure there probably has been a comic about him as a sort of jobbing up and coming actor at some stage in the decades he's existed, but mainly he's this sort of mega superstar who is both an A-list Avenger and an A-list actor. That's kind of his gimmick.
Yeah.
So they've played with it a little bit. You could theoretically do something like that in the future if he turned up and joined the Avengers or something, but no, this is a slightly tweaked version of Wonder Man.
Yeah. The version that appears on the TV screen is a more camp take on the character.
I guess so. I mean, he's been around since the 70s, so I'm sure there are some quite maybe slightly camp-seeming Wonder Man comics out there.
Yeah,
I mean, the costumes Simon wears in the film sequences towards the end are reasonably faithful to like recent Wonder Man costumes. I guess that's this show's version of the he's wearing the outfit moment, again, without actually having a big superhero fight, which is kind of clever.
Well, that's partly because, the bit when he's wearing it on set, I assume those are the sort of things that they nod to, like, comics continuity, when you see him on set in the costume and things like that. And then, I guess, I don't know if the 70s film version is, like, more in line with, like, 70s depictions of Wonder Man.
Not based on my limited knowledge. I think it's quite a departure, but, I can't pretend to be an expert. I haven't read that many comics of Wonder Man in.
And as we've said also, they're kind of getting to the point with the sort of relative obscurity of the MCU characters they're doing that they do feel they can take quite a lot of liberties. They can change things like quite a lot if they need to make the story because it's not something that everyone's familiar with. I mean, there's also been some big changes. They pretty much ditched Tony Stark's alcoholism, for example.
Yeah, no, they've tweaked a lot. I mean, a lot of it, for a lot of the major characters, there's like hundreds of issues of this stuff, and they sort of distill it into this focused version that they think will work, and often they ditch a lot of things that they don't want to deal with. You know, they've ditched Gwen Stacy from Spider-Man.
Well, yeah, they focus in on telling the story that they want to tell, and it'll make a good story. And this one, I think they really have excelled themselves by coming in like, well, what is an interesting take that we've not seen before? And this very down-to-earth take really does work, and I thought was really, really good. And yeah, I think also, you know, a lot of respect to Marvel for actually, you know, doing this. It must have been a crazy thing to pitch, like kind of like, we're going to do a Wonder Man TV show, but like it's mainly just about him bumming around LA, not being a successful actor, and there isn't a supervillain and things like that. And then maybe Marvel were like, well, we can't spend all the money on Avengers Doomsday, and this seems quite cheap. Also the fact that like, yeah, it's good. It's good. I mean, yeah, it helps you when you got like Ben Kingsley, and yeah, I haven't seen Yahya Abdul-Mateen II in anything before, at least not that I'm aware of, but he's a great actor, so.
He was the younger Morpheus in Matrix Resurrection, I think.
Oh, yes. And he was good in that.
That's the thing I've seen him in. But yeah, he was pretty good in that. It wasn't a massive part.
No, and that was a film that came and went quite loudly. Candyman, who's in, everyone said that was pretty good. Aquaman. Ambulance was another thing that people said was quite good. Oh, he was in the TV show Watchmen. And Trial of the Chicago 7. Oh, and Us.
Okay, so we've seen him in several things.
There's quite a lot of stuff, actually, he's been in that I hadn't quite twigged it was the same guy. Where they have spent money on this, it's in the casting, and it's certainly paid off.
This was really good. To be fair, you know, it's been a reasonable run for Marvel since sort of early last year with Daredevil. And of course, in a few episodes' time, we'll be back around to Daredevil again and see if they can make it the full year.
Yeah, exactly. But no, this was really, really good. It was, like, again, a character I didn't know really anything about, and a show that I had, like, zero expectations for, and the fact that, like, very little was information leaked out in advance, and it's not a character I knew, so I kind of went in with sort of a blank slate. I was a bit like, after the first episode, I was like, oh, this is different. Colour me intrigued. People who've been listening to this podcast long enough know me well enough to know that I'm the sort of person who would go like, ooh, a Marvel show, but actually it's mainly about a depressed guy struggling to be an actor. That actually sounds like totally my thing.
Yeah, no, I'm here for weird tonal clashes.
Finally, this episode, we will be discussing the third volume of The Power Fantasy, a new comic by Kieran Gillen, Caspar Wijngaard, and Clayton Cowles. This volume picks up where Volume 2 left off, after Etienne has been murdered, or so we think, and the superpowers are now poised at each other's throats, each one with the potential destructive power equivalent to the entire US nuclear arsenal. The world very much teeters on the brink. The stakes couldn't possibly be higher. We have read the complete third volume of this comic. Nick, what do you think of it?
Yeah, trying not to do spoilers for at least a minute. I really liked this. As I think I remarked on social media shortly after reading it, it really feels like they're firing Chekov's gun and also all Chekov's other weapons in this arc. It really feels like they're, having spent the last 11 issues mostly quite deliberately doing a bunch of setup about all the secrets the superpowers are keeping and the true scale of their powers. It really feels like it all kicks right off in this arc. There's one issue which has a bit more flashbacky stuff to reveal one last big thing, but other than that, it's very much present day, straightforward, dynamic, bang, 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 bang. And yeah, it's really good. It feels like the huge payoff it actually is. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, this story is consistently really, really good. I mean, we gave both the first and the second volume, I think, a very good review in this podcast, and I feel this third volume, maintains the quality very much and sort of raises the stakes. It builds to a sort of conclusion in the sense that, like, this is very much a sort of firmer end at the end of this volume than like the previous one, which was very much like a cliffhanger at the end of volume 2, but there was definitely a consistent raising of stakes and tension, and it does become very, very tense as the main characters and the entire world hurtles closer together to conflict.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say Kieran Gillen didn't warn us. You can't say he's not paying off what he promised. The whole premise of the series is basically, if the superpowers come into conflict, inevitably it would be a disaster. And sure enough, once the balance is tipped by the assassination attempt on Etienne at the end of the second book, yeah, it's now a massive struggle to avoid sliding headlong into Armageddon. Once one thing goes, another thing goes, and another thing goes, and it's just a very metaphor for the fragile state of the world, I suspect.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I think the fact that, like, once you tip a sort of precariously balanced system out of balance, balance. It's only a matter of time before like disaster strikes and the whole thing comes crashing down. Although it is interesting that it takes a few issues for disaster to really play out, and it doesn't come about the way that I necessarily thought it might from the position they left it at the end of volume 2, which I guess is like really good writing, because it shows like, well, you kind of know the rough woolly where the story's going, as you do with a lot of stories, but there are still surprises and twists along the way and things that catch you off guard or don't unfold the way that you anticipate them, and that's a way, to keep the story consistently good.
Yeah, there's some very clever sort of toying with your expectations about what the cliffhanger at the end of book 2 means. He sort of plays a bit with what you might expect him to do in this kind of book, and then goes another way entirely. There's also a big twist about the Etienne character, which I did not see coming and which I thought was pretty impressive. So yeah, it's very well done. This very much feels like a comic where a master plan exists. It feels very thoroughly planned.
Yeah, there's definitely a very complex world that's there. There's like the sort of main characters, and they've each got a sort of, again, they feel like three-dimensional people with like full lives. At this point, we've had quite a few flashbacks filling in the details, so we've had quite a lot of time with the characters and really know who they are and what their details are. And then also there's a lot of like kind of building up the different like groups and factions and power systems. I mean, it really is quite complicated how many different sort of overlapping things there are in this. There's a lot of characters, and there's quite a lot of different facets to the story, and like quite complex aspects of the world building and how the different superpowers work, their magic system. So it's very well thought out, and a lot of thought has gone into it, but also it's not, particularly long. I mean, this is 16 issues across 3 volumes, considering how many characters and how complex this world is. It's very efficiently done, the story, and it's always done with an eye with keeping it dramatic, keeping it moving forwards, staying focused on story and character, not having like large bits of exposition and things like that. So even though it is a complex world and we've seen quite a lot of it, it's always feels like the primary focus is on the story, which again is like great writing.
Yeah, I mean, the first 2 volumes especially were very, very dense. Like, there was a lot of like world building and setup and character motivation stuff crammed into each individual issue, which, you almost don't realise quite how much information you've absorbed until you get to this point and you're like, oh shit, so they have this agenda, they have this agenda, they have this agenda, and that's going to clash in this obvious way. And yeah, as I say, the plates slip and stop spinning and it all goes horribly wrong. It's very, very nicely choreographed.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I think we're about to say the same thing, in fact. Yeah, as well as being very well written and well plotted, the artwork is absolutely beautiful.
Oh, yeah. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. I just thought, like, there's just such beautiful designs, and really do a good job of conveying the characters' like emotional and mental states through the artwork. Especially liked the very gothic design of the kind of and look and feel of the Eliza Hellbound character. The dramatization of her mental breakdown, I think, is done in interesting, like, graphic detail in the sense of like a detailed approach to graphics and design and artwork. And that really brings the character to life, I felt.
Yeah, as you say, a lot of it is sort of subtle emotional stuff, like because the entire tension is based on, which of these characters is going to finally slip over the edge, and them losing control of their emotions will result in them losing control of their powers, which will potentially destroy the world. And therefore there's a lot of like very subtle, nuanced characterization as they spar with each other, and it's very well played over some quite long, tense conversations in this book when things finally come to a head. And as you say, once things kick off a bit and you get stuff like Eliza Hellbound losing her grip and then other characters also losing their grips, there's a couple of pages in the final issue where things start to really, as you might guess, in the final issue, go to shit, which are absolutely amazing. Again, I'm vaguely dancing around spoilers, but some of the really big final showdown moments in the last issue are just amazing.
Yeah, especially it does build to like a really, really good climax in the the last issue of the third of these volumes, and they built up the tension to the point that like it moves quite quickly at the end and goes through like the events happen quite fast, but then like it's really your sense of like rapid payoff. You kind of get into the big spectacular action bit after everything's been built up and the stakes have been established. Now it's time for some serious payoff.
Well, yeah, it kind of reminds me vaguely of when I read that nuclear war scenario book. But yeah, it sort of builds slowly, but once it's been triggered, it just gets faster and faster and faster. Things just escalate with terrifying speed once this force has been unleashed. Everyone else does the same, and it just gets to a point of no return terrifyingly quickly. Yeah,
it's like the Hemingway quote, how did you go bankrupt? Slowly at first, then very quickly.
Yeah, the pacing of the comic is very well played to portray exactly that happening, in this sort of massive, broad scale of these 5 dudes who can destroy the world. Yeah, it's great. As you say, there's a sort of ending. It's a season break break ending, basically. It's this is the end of the first like major chunk of story, and then I think they're taking a bit of a break, then they'll be back with more hopefully later this year.
Yeah, and I did think it was a really, really good ending. I don't know if we're going to avoid spoilers, at least for now, but yeah, it's a classic, like, well, where is this going? And they're like, oh, that's interesting, where it gets to the end. So yeah, again, it's what you want from your ending, to be very much like, oh, I'm interested to see what happens next. Also, it's one of those things, it felt more of a pause ending, as you say, whereas like the ending of Volume 2 was very much a dramatic cliffhanger with the kind of like, oh my god, I can't believe that, like what's going to happen in the next like minutes or seconds, whereas this was more of the story's reached a natural point. If it was a book, it might be the end of a book 1 or whatever. I know it's Volume 3, but it's, I guess, 16 issues is maybe close to the amount of plot you get in a novel.
As I say, I think it's a sort of season break thing. You've got the big payoff to that season, and then you've got a tease for what the new premise will be going forward in season 2.
Yeah.
I think basically there's going to be another chunk of around this length, and then that might be it. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we end up with 2 massive hardbacks for each section at some point in the future, which I may consider buying. I'll see how I'm doing at the time. Really likes this.
Yeah, it's extremely good. I mean, we've talked a lot about Kieran Gillen on this podcast. We've read quite a few of his comics, both contemporary ones and some of his like back catalogue through the recommendations, and they've always been really, really good, and he's always been a really good storyteller. And this one, obviously, yeah, as we alluded to earlier and I think discussed in more detail in the previous reviews, this is like, an overt metaphor for Cold War and nuclear sort of standoff and things like that. As we were saying before, that like, with Wonder Man or things like that, how superheroes are used as a metaphor, or, with civil rights and X-Men and things like that. Again, very much using superheroes as a metaphor for nuclear war here. I really kind of like that dynamic to it, in that it's kind of about geopolitics in quite an abstract way, in that it's much more focused on, like, again, the personalities and the characters, because it's a person who has the sort of destructive power of an entire army. So it's not so much about like the processes that necessarily lead to war, but more the personalities and things like that, and the balance of power between individuals. The relationships between world leaders is a crucial part of how wars happen or don't happen, but also it allows you to tell a story that is much more focused on character and character relationships than, say, a story like A House of Dynamite, which is much more about like processes and institutions and how they interact with each other. And House of Dynamite has a lot of tension because it's set over the 20 minutes as a missile hurtles towards America. This one, I feel, is more of it's a wider look at nuclear standoffs and nuclear conflict, but it does have that very strong character focus, which is what makes it so entertaining to read.
Yeah, I mean, Kieran Gillen, as you say, we talked about his work before. We specifically covered his comic Uber, which was a much more detailed, nitty-gritty bit of historical research, where he really fed the sort of superhero elements into the history. Whereas in this one, although there is some sort of similar historical revisionism in terms of his insertion of various like big superhero incidents, because he's dealing with superheroes, he can make it a lot more heightened and dramatic, and make it, as you say, a lot more of a sense of like competing personalities in a really direct way. Yeah, it's a nice way of using superheroes. It also lets him, I guess, do things that they probably wouldn't let him do with company-owned superheroes. I think he has said before, but some of this is him getting ideas out that he couldn't do on like the X-Men because they just wouldn't let him. So yeah, I think it's serving a few purposes here, and it's doing a lot of it very well.
Yeah, I mean, there's also things like he can kill off a character in this, and there's this, you get the sense that character is dead. Whereas, as we talked about before, that like in something like X-Men or whatever, they always bring back people after they die, especially if they're famous. Whereas I guess this is like more finite a story.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is an actual story rather than a massive franchise. There's not going to be, unless something very odd happens, another power fantasy writer after Kieran Gillen.
No, exactly, yeah. And also, it is entirely like his world in that he kind of knows the characters, and he kind of knows like their limits, their arcs, what he wants to do with them, what he wants to say to them, and that comes across in the fact that he's kind of very confident in telling this specific story. It also means a lot of work went into this, like really a lot of work. I mean, there's sort of an essay in the back of each issue and some letters pages about the process and the kind of research and like the world building that went into it, and it does get across like how much work goes into creating something like this, even though it's only 16 issues at this point. So it's not an enormous amount of story, even compared to say like, a trilogy of sci-fi novels, but an enormous amount of thought and world building has gone into it. And I suppose, and it's also reading those essays at the back really does make you appreciate the effort and thought that's gone into it.
Kieran Gillen's always been quite a maximum effort writer, but this does feel like a particularly heavily planned project. I've read the first volume of his other series, Die, which has come back for a second volume, but I've not started that yet. But I have read all the first volume, and that, at least to me, feels like a bit more of a sort of emotion-driven adventure where he's able to focus a bit more on character maybe. But this feels very intellectually driven or research driven. It feels like there's a lot of very careful planning.
Yeah. Also, it's a wide-angled lens look at this world. Like, it's about the big events in this world and the most important characters in it. So when you're doing like a sort of wide-angled look, like an epic fantasy or something like that, I mean, not too dissimilar to what we were talking about last week, and the difference between A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms and Game of Thrones is that, like, this is like the high fantasy story in that it's like about the whole world and the most important things in it and the people who shape the world itself. And obviously you kind of need to understand the whole world in order to tell that story.
So yeah, this remains one of my favourite current comics. I'm very happy that there was rumours going around online that it might actually end with this volume. Kieran Gillen sort of implies to an extent was him trolling, but he also did maybe seriously consider it depending on how sales were going. But I'm very happy to hear it's coming back.
Yeah, I really like this. I thought this was brilliant. So definitely want to come back for Volume 4 whenever it's available and get to the end.
Well, as I say, it looks like they're taking a bit of a season break, so hopefully somewhere approximately this time next year, we'll either have the fourth volume or there'll be a clear date for the fourth volume. But yeah, we'll be back for more Power Fantasy.
Yep, keep an eye on the podcast.
Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you very much for listening. As ever, if you've enjoyed this podcast, you can go to moderatefantasyviolence.com and get still more episodes, some essays, some bonus cutscenes, everything you could possibly want. And if you enjoy that, please leave us a nice review on your podcast application of choice, or, I don't know, anywhere else that will let you. Trustpilot maybe, who knows.
And after that, you can follow us on Blue Sky by searching for @MFV Podcast, or find us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. You can also find me, I'm Alistair Ball, on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky. You can get more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. You can get my theatre reviews at everythingtheatre.com. And you can find my newsletter, The Post, on MFV Blue Sky accounts. Probably the easiest way to get there.
And you can find me at nickbryan.com on the internet, nickbryan.com on Blue Sky, and nickbryan.com with the word dot written out on Instagram, where you'll mostly find me posting about my currently running Kickstarter for the Collected Letters of Courier Z. And when I say currently running, I think you have still got about a week after this episode comes out, if I've read Z calendar correctly. So yes, going back Courier Z, I will not be able to remind you again. It's my new anthology of sci-fi crime post-woman stories with a new team of good artists. You can get volume 1 from the same Kickstarter if you somehow missed it. Thank you.
I've backed it. I'm very excited to read this comic, and I recommend you all back it too.
Hey. Oh yeah, still me. And after that, long after the Courier Z Kickstarter has finally finished, we will be back with another episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, in which we will be covering the new show from Lisa McGee, writer of Derry Girls, How to Get to Heaven from Belfast, and the new BBC Supernatural series Small Profits. See you in 2 weeks for that. Bye-bye.
Bye.